I was totally blown away by this. It's exactly the kind of peer-to-peer exchange that we were hoping to foster in the collective, and it's just really powerful to see this happening.
Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Passive House podcast. I'm Zach Semke. I'm a co-host of the podcast based in Seattle, Washington, and I am joined here today by Ilka Cassidy and Jay Fox, also co-hosts of the Passive House podcast. We are missing Matthew Cutler-Welsh this episode, but we'll soldier on without Matthew's insights. We have a really special episode to share today about the Reimagine Summer Labs and a group interview with the participants of the Summer Labs. But before we get into that, Ilka, what's going on for you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the last warm days here in Philadelphia. And yeah, I guess I'm just looking forward to the conference season, I guess. Seeing
That's
everyone
right.
at FierceCon in a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's going to be fun to be in Milwaukee for
Mhm.
sure. How about you, Jay?
Doing really well. Went on a farm tour this weekend and saw a bunch of local farms and how they're using sustainable and regenerative agriculture to grow our food for folks here in Asheville. We're also coming up on a year since Helene, and it was
Oh,
interesting
wow.
to kind of hear how people recovered and bounced back from that. So that was interesting. I'm also going to make hard cider again, which is now going to become a fall tradition after last year since I bought all the equipment. Long story. Ask me about that sometime. But I'm also excited about conference season because I'll be going up to New York this week. I'll be at Regenerative Metropolis and a couple other events, and then also FierceCon. So, looking forward to actually seeing some people from the community in person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fun. And we just finished our massive impact online conference last week, which was a really great success and super inspiring. And big thank you to Kim Davis and Kara Ang for producing that and for all of Kim's work in curating it. It's really great to see all these inspiring examples of work really scaling up. So it's a fun season to see the cool projects that people are working on. Okay, so we're going to dive into this interview here in just a moment, and we have representatives from each of the summer labs. We had 8 summer labs happening this past season, and I go into some detail at the beginning of the conversation about what the summer labs are, so I don't think we need to repeat that. But before we dive into the interview, I want to thank some special folks. First, I want to thank our sponsor of the week, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, for making everything possible for us here at the Accelerator this week, including this episode of the Passive House podcast, as well as the programming, including our Passive House Accelerator live episode on Wednesday, which will feature reports from a few of the summer labs. I also want to thank our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Zola Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050. So with that, let's dive in, and thanks Ilka and Jay for hosting this interview as well. It was great to have your perspectives and questions as we explore things with the Summer Lab participants.
Welcome everyone to the Passive House Accelerator podcast. And we have a pretty full house today. And it is also the first time that Jay and I are co-hosting this. So very exciting. Hi, Jay. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Good, good. So this is very exciting today because we are going to talk about something that happened in the Reimagine Buildings Collective over the summer. And before we introduce all of our guests, Zach is with us here today. Maybe Zach, you can talk a little bit about what actually happened in the summer in the collective.
Yeah, thank you, Ilka. Thank you, Jay. And thanks everybody for being here. This is going to be super fun. As Ilka mentioned, this summer, we tried something new inside the Reimagine Buildings Collective. And so we launched the Summer Labs. And these were small member-led groups that came together over a few weeks to dig into some of the biggest questions in high-performance building decarbonization, resilience, all of that. And each lab met at least 3 times. I think some labs have met more than that many times, collaborating and discussing and thinking and gathering information and producing a short insight brief to capture their key takeaways on the kind of core problem or question that they were engaging with. And the purpose of this, or the kind of the goal, was to create lightweight, peer-driven ways for members to share what they know, for us to test ideas, generate new insights together. So it was kind of a think and do tank. Each of these labs were little think and do tanks. So less about kind of theory and more about, really digging into practice, rolling up our sleeves and looking at potential solutions. It represents this, I think, another thing that I thought was really cool about this is it's representing this evolution of the collective from a place where we learn to also a place where we're really creating knowledge as members. So yesterday, we had our first ever Summer Lab Confab, where each group presented their briefs to one another. And we had this great conversation, and it was super inspiring to hear about phased retrofits and fire resilience and AI in practice and passive survivability. And these were, just really great grounded solution ideas that folks were sharing. So I was totally blown away by this. It's exactly the kind of peer-to-peer exchange that we were hoping to foster in the collective. And it's just really powerful to see this happening. And I kind of had goosebumps yesterday as we were going through it. So it's going to be a really great conversation. I should probably stop talking so we have time to actually dive into it. But I think we're all in for a treat. And thanks for listening.
So I was able to sit in and listen to all the kind of little presentations yesterday. And I think for me, we're going to hear about what each group kind of came up with. But I think for me, the most impactful takeaway was kind of at the end when everyone was talking about, do we want to keep going? Do we want to, meet again? And I think everyone from the group kind of emphasized how important the community was, just how they felt being in these little cohorts over the summer. And yeah, I think it's great. I mean, it's great to share all that knowledge, but I think it's also really great to feel being part of this community and that everyone really wants to keep going with it. Yeah, maybe we'll just start with the first group. So I think it was AI, so super interesting. And we have Randall Anway to talk about that. Could you introduce yourself, kind of tell us what you do, and then what your group kind of investigated and came up with?
Sure. My name is Randall Anway. I'm an architect based in Connecticut, registered in New York and Connecticut. Also, I'm an independent researcher, and that currently is my primary focus. I've been doing a lot of work lately in looking at how to integrate AI into architectural practice. And when we met, we had a good group of folks from around the country and some really good interaction and discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the subjects that came up, I'll let you speak more to it a little bit later, but one of the subjects that I found really interesting was the idea of, can it be used sustainably? Which I think is, a lot of folks in this community are kind of hesitant to jump right in because they're worried that, it uses a lot of energy, but do you see it in the future getting a lot more sustainable and a lot more efficient so that you drive down the amount of energy you need to use? Do you see that happening within the next couple of years, or is it going to be like a decades thing? What's your kind of take on that?
That's a really great question. So if you look at what we're seeing in the last couple of years, the major development is in the area of what's called foundation models. These are just massive models of language. It's not just English, but other languages as well, that are created from large amounts of data. So basically, they ingest the internet and they process it into a bunch of numbers. And it's a lot of statistics and math and so on. And yes, that is very energy intensive. But I think for a lot of the applications we're maybe contemplating or beginning to contemplate for practice, you don't need those huge models and processes. And I think that the hurdle or the gateway we have to go through is making use of these models in intelligent ways that help move the ball forward in for sustainability concerns and so on. So there's a lot of tools that are out there already, and the models that are out there can be really quite useful for that kind of activity, but I don't see that like being a permanent part of the landscape. So between here and there, I think a lot of development needs to take place, and practitioners are actually the best people to do it.
What did your group kind of come up with in terms of already using AI, or where they see the biggest potential, where it's going?
We did have a couple of conversations and explorations. One exploration we did was, and this was very quick, using a large language model to investigate designing for wildfire resilience using Passive House. And it actually came up with some plausible and useful information. That was one. The other one was looking at using an AI tool to help manage complex product information, for instance, Windows and Windows specifications. And the exercise there was to use the large language model to develop a list of parameters that might be of interest in the design process, and sort of conceptualizing what might go into developing, say, a window schedule with appropriate details. Yeah, and interestingly enough, the model was able to come up with something very plausible. The caveat here, though, is that these models can be very convincing, and on the first flush, you don't necessarily know what you're looking at. You really need to do your due diligence to verify and validate any information that it's coming up with. And it also helps that if you have that domain knowledge, so you know what looks right and you know if it's wrong. So in that sense, sort of using the models to augment your existing skill sets, that's really an important first step.
So for me, I had talked to someone who is in the design profession about using AI as well. And she was saying what's really interesting now is rather than selling your design, you actually sell a prompt.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting. And maybe that's something to think further about as well. Maybe, a group like yours could come up with certain prompts that then, other groups can use to be very specific in what they're asking for.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're pointing out an important new term of the AI age, and that's prompt engineering.
Yeah.
It's on the surface, it's a relatively simple skill to acquire, but there's a lot of depth and breadth there.
And you do need that knowledge, right? You can't really ask a very specific question unless you have that knowledge.
That's right, yeah. And often the more specific you can be in your prompt, the more useful it is.
Yeah.
Or the more useful the result is.
I also feel, and I do have a bit of a medical background. That sounds way more impressive than it actually is, and I've been reading these papers where, these large language models are scanning through papers that are from like the 1950s that were not, the layout isn't as clean as it probably should be. So there's two words that are connected and it's reading those two words as if they're connected. And so it's making up basically these very jargony sounding terms that actually are gibberish. But if you don't if you don't already have a background in medicine or a background and know what these terms mean, it can easily be passed off as a real thing. Having that background and not coming in purely as an amateur is also important.
So yesterday we also talked about, okay, where do these groups go now and what kind of deliverables are there? So what do you think your deliverable will be out of this group? What other people can benefit from?
I think one of the most important things we could do is try to help others learn more about this field and sort of get over the fear hurdle and improve our comfort level working with technology. I think one of the suggestions that came up might apply to, say, like a pilot project that might be taking a process or collecting, for instance, some details from the community and seeing what we can do with an AI to make a useful resource.
So let's then move over to the passive survivability group. So I think we have 3 people here.
To introduce myself, I'm Mike Fowler. I'm an architect at Methuen in Seattle, Washington, and part of a group of, I don't know, 7 or 8 of us that got together over the summer and to talk about passive survivability. And Valerie will cover, I think, about sort of the breadth of things that we looked at. But I came into this with a very strong focus and having looked at past projects from what happens to apartment building units when there's an extreme heat wave and conditions of no power. And the reason that I've sort of taken an interest in that is that in 2021, here in the Pacific Northwest, there was a heat dome that happened in June. And for Seattle, we had temperatures where we don't top 100. We had 3 days over 100, peaking at 108. Portland, Oregon had peaks at 116, though there were surrounding areas that had higher temperatures. With the small town that was in British Columbia, and a day or two later, burned to the ground was 122. And so there was over 1,400 people who died in that Pacific Northwest heat dome event. I learned that heat is probably an unknown threat to a lot of folks, that it has been typically every year. And on average, over the past 30 years, there's been more deaths caused from heat and heat-related illness than any other weather-related event. And so we're looking at, how does Passive House work in these conditions? And, the results are that, yes, Passive House absolutely does help, but there are some conditions where it's maybe not going to do all of it. So we may want to have thoughts with where you're in east of the Rocky Mountains in Canada and the US, where there's a lot more humidity in the summer. We may need one looking at backup power supplies to keep our HRV or HRV, ERV running, or providing so that those systems function, because now we're also dealing with, in the summertime, a lot of wildfire smoke at the same time. So power's out and there's a wildfire smoke event, you're stuck with choosing between, can I open my window and get cooler air in the evening? But if there's wildfire smoke that's letting in smoke that is very unhealthy, where do I keep the windows closed and keep warming my apartment? So those were some of the things that we looked at. Valerie, I'll stand it over to you, so I have to take all the bandwidth here.
No, it's fine. It's fine, Mike. We were supposed to only pick one person, and we were the ones who decided no, we're just going to do collaborative. We're going to just bounce between us. And it's worked so good so far. So we're just going to kind of keep going. My name is Valerie Amor, and I'm a certified passive house designer. So I've been in this for a while. And I also own an architectural firm, Drawing Conclusions. And I have worked in this area of resilience in Florida, in New York City, and now in Alexandria. And one of the things that I think was really important in our conversation was how many topics that we discussed. I mean, Mike's being more technical with it, but really, it was really a wide breadth of discussion. It had to do with, urban and rural. How is that sort of understood? Regulatory, does it help? Does it create a barrier? Low tech, high tech solutions. If all your electricity goes out, what do you do? So there is technical solutions with the passive house itself, and that was one of the things we also explored. Typical construction, how long does it last? Perhaps an extreme weather event like with heat, it'll stay cooler. In a passive house, rather typical might go not even one day and not make it. Also, then defining it more of in a cultural community sense as well. Who gets to define resilience and what does survivability actually mean? Which is so we titled our brief, it's called Passive Survivability, No Power, then No Problem, ? Because we weren't sure that actually was addressing, and there's such a broad range of different topics that you can really go into it.
Yeah, and I think one of the points that came up was this idea of kind of your house becomes a bit of a lifeboat, and there's a conception that is how you survive is that you need it to be as functional and comfortable as possible, but that kind of is atomizing in a way, and it takes you out of the community. Whereas, if you can rely on community members, that can actually really improve your odds and make life a little bit more comfortable. Lloyd, I feel like you like that idea, and you're going to say something really smart where I'm going to ramble, so I'm going to shut up.
No, I thought you were just doing a great job of summarizing it. The issue is that, we have to optimize and contribute right from the beginning. When we design our passive houses, we have to be thinking about, what is causing this problem? And so we have to have sort of smart design, shading, form, fire safety, low embodied carbon with right-sized all electric systems and backup energy that makes them both survivable and not just an independent lifeboat, but a part of the whole climate solution.
Yeah, and what I thought was interesting too is just the thought that it goes beyond just the building as well, right? So survivability or sustainability is not just about this building. It goes so much further outside the building. And, it's kind of even like in a different group, we actually had that conversation about, okay, what is this survivability? Does it also include neighbors that might have AC,
Yes.
can help out other neighbors that don't? Like, how far does it go? And just kind of, changing that mindset a little bit of just kind of taking care of your little space beyond that and making it survive, making heat waves survivable for everyone. And then, as an architect, really thinking about, okay, how do we set up these spaces that benefit a lot of people and not just the one homeowner?
Jay and Ilka, I'm thrilled that you both got this out of it. That message got through like that. Thank you very much.
It made me think of Vienna House, which is a project up in Vancouver. They used a type of software called Fluid, I want to say, where they actually map, the design will map the likelihood of interactions between neighbors within this multifamily building. And they did that in order to, maximize the number of interactions in order to create a sense of community, because they found during the heat dome in 2021 that Mike brought up earlier, some of the deaths, or a lot of the deaths, were the elderly, and they didn't have anybody coming to check on them. So this helps to create more of a community, so people are checking on them and they're not just kind of sitting there alone in overheating spaces.
Yeah. So I think since we're talking about, survivability and fires that might happen, maybe we'll move over to the group of fire resiliency next. So we have Lauren Shadid.
That's right. Hi, I'm Lauren Shadid. I'm an architect based here in Colorado, just south of Denver. I have a single family residential practice, and I'm a certified passive house designer. I practice in Colorado and in California, both areas that are prone to wildfire, which is why I joined this particular group. And it was great. We met a couple of times. Our first two meetings was a group of about 6 of us, and then we actually merged with a second group that had been meeting for our third roundtable. We had a variety of backgrounds. Some of us were architects. Some people were just individuals that were actually building their own homes in WUI areas. So it led to a lot, kind of like the previous group, a lot of kind of varied discussions. My group initially was kind of focused a little bit more on a lot of the technical detailing and things that are just inherently fire resilient about Passive House. So we were talking a lot about materials and the systems, the things that, like air tightness and the multi-glazed windows and tempered windows and just reducing the wall penetrations and form factor and all of those kind of really important details to Passive House that are just inherently fire resilient. And then the second group was a little bit more focused on insurance and building codes and kind of making sure if they were going to pursue Passive House design, how could that potentially benefit them in terms of insurability? And, kind of some of their conclusions were that there does seem to be a bit of a gap in terms of the insurance industry and sort of their knowledge about Passive House and the fire resiliency. And, how can we basically help bridge that gap and, help make the case for how Passive House is really a great asset. And also, so where are those overlaps, like both with insurance and also building code and just sort of helping people kind of achieve all of these things by using the Passive House standards. Yeah, lots of great discussions with that. And then we also just kind of had a big brain dump of all sorts of resources from WUI checklist, some of the building codes, a lot of things with the Passive House network, great materials. And so we have all of these things kind of put into the brief that we created to, hopefully at least give people a starting point. But I think it would be great to continue to have further discussions. Some of the people in our group, we had different levels of experience, but it also brought different levels of perspective and questions and things to think about. So I think it would be great to continue to have more conversations and bring even more people and more experts into our group and kind of, continue to look at what are some of the best practices and where can we use Passive House to leverage fire resiliency.
Yeah, I think the insurance aspect of one of the benefits of Passive House, particularly in WUI zones, something I feel like we kind of overlook sometimes and don't necessarily think about because we're always just thinking about the design and the actual like assembly of the building. Are there currently any insurance companies that kind of recognize Passive House as having a benefit in the event of a wildfire or any kind of natural disaster for that matter?
One that they mentioned and was a company called Stand, I think it was Stand Insurance, that is doing that's using Passive House and kind of, working with that to, to help, come up with more reason, kind of mitigating on the early side, in terms of the design and making sure that people are following some of these guidelines. So that was the only one that they had come up with. There may be others out there. I'm not sure. That was, again, that second group. But yeah, I think that was one of the areas that we discussed is that, could that be an opportunity within Passive House to try to, educate insurers more. And one of the things that came up with that too is that like Colorado has a House bill that's emerging, it's coming out next year, that's going to push insurers to consider mitigation efforts in their risk assessments. Yeah, I think it seems like it's kind of a work in progress. So
I'm curious. I feel like yesterday there was someone who talked about building codes in that kind of, together with this topic. Do you see any change in building codes now that, the fire danger seems to get higher? And, does that have any impact on insurance? You would think that all of it somehow kind of, works together or against each other. How do you see that?
yeah, I mean, there are definitely areas where, where there are certain zones where you're considered to be in the very high fire zone, where you have to, meet certain just basic thresholds just to get your building permit, in terms of non-combustible materials. But I actually just saw, I know California is coming up with I think they're trying to implement a zero zone mandate in certain areas of rebuilding. So in terms of having that 5-foot separation around the house, that 5-foot non-combustible defensible space. I think it looks like they're trying to push that through. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what comes out of all that.
Yeah. Interesting. So maybe we'll move to the next group. And one really interesting group I thought was selling passive house, right? You would think that, fire resiliency is a good reason to sell passive house, but the findings were actually a little bit different, right, Paul?
Yeah, that's right. We had a great group together. I'm Paul Heron. I am a building scientist and renovator in Washington, D.C. And we had a great group of architects, Lloyd Alter, who you all know from his Carbon Upfront newsletter, Trey Farmer, an architect in Texas, Bo Green, he's the chapter lead for Passive House DC. Silas Pauthoff, he's a physician's assistant in emergency medicine in LA and a certified Passive House consultant, and James Turner, a marketing consultant. So we brought a lot of different perspective to our group. And what I thought was really interesting about it was we spent the first several sessions trying to get over our enthusiasm for Passive House and our own hubris. As you see in this group here, we love to talk about the design details and the assembly details and the modeling and all that. But that is not really what resonates with our clients, and that's not what moves people. And ultimately our takeaway that we concluded with, which was the subject of our paper, was the best way to sell passive house is don't. And we spent most of our time talking about what are our interests and passions, and we did talk about residential and what residential people like. We talked about the different features, as Lloyd has always elaborated on and enumerated, as far as what is interesting or what people prioritize. But what we ultimately came back around to is, what Zig Ziglar has said time and time again, which is people don't buy for logical reasons, they buy for emotional reasons. And that's the truth with passive house as it is with cars and phones and toasters and everything else that we buy. And so where we went with that is really trying to look at what is it that we have in common. Because one of the other things that came to us is one of the passions that we came in with was sometimes we're passionate about passive house. Sometimes what we're passionate about is averting climate change or mitigating climate change. And we come in with this idea that passive house is just by just saying the word is a manna from heaven. And somehow people are going to hear this and say, oh, this is what I should do. But it isn't. And on the commercial side, it's often driven by, financial payback. And so what we looked for was, what's the commonality amongst all of this? And we concluded that it is listening to the clients and identifying their pain point, of figuring out what it is that motivates them, what is the thing that they want the most. And this is something that we do all the time. We know this naturally, and we also do this in our own decision making whether we're going out to buy a car or we're evaluating to buy that new toaster or anything else. This is not new or unique, but it is listening to our clients, identifying their pain points, and then using that knowledge that we have of passive house and tying those capabilities back to addressing the client's particular need. And that was really powerful for all of us when we got to the end of that, because it really helped us feel much more confident about what we're doing. Because sometimes you come into this and the question is, how do I sell passive house? Expecting that we should somehow be able to just present the notion of passive house and sell it. And no, what we really should be doing is doing what we do already, which is coming up with solutions for our clients to their problems. And if passive house happens to be that solution, then that's great. And if passive house isn't that solution, we're still solving the problem for the client. And the only other thing that we really found to emphasize was, let's not get caught up or make good the enemy of perfection. Yes, we all want passive house out there, but improvements, getting to a better solution is still progress, and we need to make sure we recognize that.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, because sometimes I feel like it's kind of all or nothing. even with talking about passive house with clients, it's almost okay, we'll go for certification, and this is all the things that you have to do. But the moment, that is not the goal anymore, all the things are not the goal anymore either, right? And I think it's really important to recognize whatever you do is better than not doing anything, and just do the best you can. I think that's a really good point. And yeah, a very good point is, how do you sell passive houses? Just don't. That definitely stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, that reminds me of a client of Michael Ingwe's who I met, and this is, I think, before I knew that Michael had worked on his house, was telling me about how he lived by the BQE, which is in the Brooklyn Queens Expressway in Brooklyn and Queens, and just wanted quiet, and he wanted clean air because he didn't want to deal with the smog. And he's, I don't know, this guy, this architect I know built it to some fancy thing, but it's quiet, so I don't care. And it's just like, all Michael did was just like, he recognized the need. He wants quiet, then you need to air seal, you need triple pane windows, you need all these other things. And yeah, the guy could not have cared less about passive house. He just wanted quiet.
That's exactly it. People buy on emotion. They don't buy on logic. Now, that's not to say that the logic of everything that we do is not important. It's always a backup bullet point. Oftentimes people will come to their conclusions based on emotion about what they want, and then they look for the points to justify it. So everything that we have here is still valuable, but we sell on the emotional part of it and what's important to them. And then we back it up with the data. And if you think about it, if you look at all the great brands out there, all the different campaigns, all of it is based on emotion. I, prior to my career, worked in advertising and public relations. And I was just harkening back to 1997 when Steve Jobs returned to Apple. And he announced a great new campaign, advertising campaign. And it had nothing to do with speeds and feeds or anything like that. It had to do with making people think and do great things. And if you look at other campaigns, Nike, Just Do It, these are emotional grabs. This is what brings people in initially. And then you tie it back to all the other great things that they do.
I think we can move to the next topic, which is also, I feel like, a very, very emotional topic. It looks like Rainger is with us now. And it is a topic about nature-based materials, because I feel like that is something that people can definitely very much buy into. Rainger, can you share the findings of your group?
Yeah, so I am a artist, woodworker, and fine art fabricator based in Hudson Valley. And I am in the process of moving on from that career and figuring out a way to insert myself into this industry that we're talking about. And I've spent the last couple of years learning about low carbon materials and prefabrication and how to combine those two. I actually think that our group had a lot of parallels with the selling passive house. It really, I think some of our biggest conclusions were that it's less about, are these materials safe and effective in high performance, which was what we were looking at, but more, how do we overcome the sort of image and expectations that people have, how to build confidence in these materials and reassure people that they're not risky and that they're not a compromise and that they, can perform really well as long as you get your detailing right, which is true for any type of material. It really felt like there's a lot of testing and information out there, but it can be hard to find and can be hard to find sort of from third-party sources rather than just from businesses that are trying to sell that product. And so there's some hesitation and some concern around legitimacy and liability. And so finding ways to try to collect all of the research and sort of proof into a more accessible place and to work on the storytelling seemed like the biggest priority.
There was a point that you brought up during the presentation yesterday about one of the problems with nature-based materials is that they're going up against these kind of industrial products that are seen as being very sleek and very scientifically proven to be high performance, when that's maybe not always the case. And like, how did your group kind of come up with, I don't know, any solutions to kind of break that connection that people have?
Yeah, I mean, it's, that idea that we're using these man-made materials because they're fixing a problem, I think is an assumption that we all have. But really the problem they're fixing is consistency, reliability, and cost, not any inherent weakness in the natural materials. And so working on that, the storytelling, and also explaining and demonstrating how some of the modern materials that we have, variable, vapor open, airtight membranes and stuff like that, and being able to combine those with natural materials and some of the prefabrication, that can get over some of the issues with sort of building with straw bales. Now we can dense pack into a panelized wall and have much higher quality control.
Yeah, and like one of the remarks you made yesterday was also that those natural materials, that people have to recognize that they are not a compromise, but an asset, right? That's kind of what stuck with me, that, this kind of mind shift away from these like sleek materials, new shiny things, basically, into something that is proven, right? That has been around forever, has been used forever in buildings, and they have been proven, and they're like naturally working the way they should be working. There's no extra engineering necessary. How do you evoke that mind shift in people? What do you think?
We actually found that in some instances, in a number of instances, the natural materials can outperform the sort of petroleum or mineral-based materials. Now, when making that argument, I realized that you have to agree beforehand with the person you're, trying to convince that a vapor open assembly is a good thing, and that moisture can be managed. And so the vapor openness, but also the hygroscopic properties of most of these materials are one of the really big benefits. Now, what that means is that they can absorb and wick moisture, so that the moisture will get spread out to a safer sort of moisture content within the entire wall assembly and dry faster. Sort of like if a sponge gets wet, it'll dry a lot faster than water just pooled under, say, a Scotch-Brite pad, which would be an analogy for fiberglass or mineral wool, which is hygroscopic. And explaining that these materials can actually be a benefit by managing moisture more efficiently, rather than trying to just block moisture, and then when it does get in, it can cause damage to the structure. So kind of understanding some of the properties, but also being aware of the downsides of those, and not using them in places where they wouldn't be allowed to dry.
Cool. I think that's a great point. And Randall, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to share a little story. Living in Connecticut, there's a lot of really old houses. So my neighbor next door, his house was built in 1690. A couple years ago, they had to replace the roof. Long story short, rain came, the roof was off. They ended up having to take down walls, and so what they found in the walls was corn cobs. Those things have been there for almost 300 years, probably more than 300 years, and very effective insulation. And to sort of close the circle with AI, that's the sort of thing you are never going to find in one of the AIs these days. So that's where the domain knowledge really counts.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that story. And it's actually a perfect gateway into our next group. So we actually have one topic, 3 different groups. The overall topic is retrofits. And we have one multifamily and two single-family retrofit groups. So I would say let's start with the multifamily group.
We've got both Sandra and Buck. Who would like to lead us off?
Sandra, I'd offer you, since you were our cohort leader there.
Sandra Lester with Affecting Change, and I've been working in the sustainability space for over 30 years now, but officially a certified passive house designer since 2021. So I help architects and building owners create green buildings and get them certified faster. And our group was a multidisciplinary team. We had people from the UK, we had people from coast to coast in United States. We had builders, we had architects, we had an engineer. So we got these really diverse perspectives on multi-unit building retrofits, multi-unit and large. And much like what the discussion has been saying about selling passive house and the whole idea behind it, we also looked at what are the objectives that the client would want and how do we pull them out in the first instance? Because if you're working to design a strategy for a building, you want to make sure that you're going in the right direction. So I often use the analogy that if you're setting out on a venture from Europe and you change the degree in which the expedition sets out by just a matter of a few degrees, you could end up either in Nova Scotia or you could end up in South America. So really figuring out the direction that you want to take your client is key. And a lot of the buildings have different instigations for retrofits. Some of them want to change the program. Some of them are seeing a need for an enhancement of accessibility and privacy. I get that a lot with my clients. And we have all these components of the building that age at different times. So the mechanical systems might be ready to be replaced, but the windows still, they're not absolutely completely broken, but they're double pane. So we talked about gathering all that data and figuring out what needs to be done and what could be done as low-hanging fruit and get them some payback running so that they're spending a lot less money on their utility bills, and all of those savings can start adding up and go towards more retrofits. So it starts with low and then it folds into deeper and deeper. And all of that is guided by a really detailed energy model. So we talked about climate and future climate and how the passive house EnerFit approach of 100% fresh air ventilation is going to really help with the wildfire smoke mitigation. It's going to help with that future pandemic that we're going to have one day where we're seeing spread of disease in close quarters. And 100% fresh air ventilation is really key to being able to isolate people within a large facility. So we saw that as really key. So our whole switch for the group really went into like future-proof phased retrofits. And how could we, like our top takeaways were figure out the drivers, figure out the needs, figure out the facts, gather the requirements for all the funders, and then you go into the products and technologies that are suitable in your geographic area. And always use the data to drive the decision making around the ECMs and the bundles of ECMs. And I'm going to put it over to Buck because I would really love to hear his take on the group as well, and maybe what surprised him and what his top learnings were that we need to share with the community.
Yeah, thank you, Sandra. A lot of what I would say will be dittoing you effectively. We had it was excellent. The diversity in the group was excellent, from in terms of regions, different experiences and the such. And we did quickly arrive on the fact that the important thing to communicate, I think the major takeaway is that it's not focusing on like getting wrapped up too much on an outcome right away, but having agreement around pursuing this process of a logical process, which is people are doing every day in some form or another, but it's fact finding in a couple respects with the existing climate that a building is located in, the existing regulatory framework that it's existing in. Is it standalone or is it an adjacent building? That's basic stuff you're always looking at. Then you take another fact finding, like what's the existing condition of the building? The systems, like building envelope systems, MEP systems, structural systems. And you have a report which identifies where are the near-term expenses. There's a time frame affiliated with all those systems that's built in to that context already, that will have to be kind of blended in to whatever you're proposing is going to reflect, because people don't want to spend money unless something's broken. So this is something I should have said, I'm an architect, New York City, certified passive house designer, chair of New York Passive House, certified since 2011. In 2014, I was approached by a building in New York City, which was a 10-unit, 5-story building. And they were interested in doing doing this, like step-by-step retrofit, occupied, not moving out, this very thing. So I ended up doing a presentation at a FIAS conference in Denver back in, I think it was 2014 or so, but about this, just trying to figure out how one does this. And I just realized that there are common sets of, my other work is with local law 97 buildings, which are 25,000 plus structured buildings, where I'm working with owners corps who are facing fines if they don't kind of reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm working at that scale. That's my city related work. The laundrette and that's upstate there that Jay referenced, that project there, a smaller scale retrofits as well. But those steps of the existing building condition, you got to fold that in. Then it's, as Sandra said, the ownership's program. What type of owner? Is it a landlord that's renting, or is it a co-op or condo? Very different outcomes or how people approach with those two things. So you take that on, but then it's goals, needs, facts, and concepts. You treat it like any architectural design project. You build that information in, as Sandra said, to it. So you've got that. And then this is the part where it is the programming step, whether you're in, we go PHI Interfit, but there are other solid programs which one might want to pursue. But you want to have a program, you want to model the building so that assuming it's a gut rehab, what do you do? What do you have to do to bring that whole building up to passive house level work? And that way you've got, or passive house level efficiency, so that that then. And then you have the tough steps are then basically taking that and you've got to take the existing condition of the building and also the client's goals and kind of dovetail them together so that you can figure out within Interfit, like what is step number one? And that's going to be like, what's going wrong? And so you figure that in step number one, then 2, 3 follow, but then you've really got to design like connection points, like to your air control layer, your thermal connectivity, so that you do work, but that's prepping to do the next phase of work. So it's very complicated and challenging, but if you look at it, just again, focus, it's a process. Like we're doing these things anyway. You just think through it logically and you will end up with a master plan for the building that you will then test. It could be a 5, 10, 20-year plan, whatever. But then you'll test it you do some work, you test, evaluate, new building owner, new board, things change. As I know Sandra knows in her projects, you have to kind of be fast on your feet and hopefully everybody's still talking to one another. But that I think, and I was thinking afterwards, we were really so lucky because we had Sandra's works is thinking about these things up in Toronto, and Debbie Chambers is an engineer in California who's getting approached with people asking for work in existing buildings, and Needy Shaw there in the UK, she works with a retrofit company business that's doing it 9 years. This all she does. So I was thinking we should have, this is Sandra, a good deliverable would be if we asked for, I could write out like that process I just laid out for what I see, but it would be great to have Sandra do that, and Debbie and Needy for her projects, and get this compilation of possible processes that people could look at. That could be a next step.
Thank you. No, I think that would be a great deliverable. I mean, I think it's amazing how diverse your group was, for sure, and how many perspectives there were. I'm interested to hear about the single family retrofits now, and how those discussions of those groups differed from the multifamily group. Maybe Mark Attard?
Yeah, hi, I'm Mark Attard. I am a high performance building consultant with Point 6 out of Denver, Colorado. And yes, we worked on the phased retrofits for single family homes, one of two groups. And we kind of took this general approach of what are the hurdles to advancing a project into a retrofit. And I think one of the first things we came up with was the idea that this was not going to be a linear process, especially because it's a phased project, and that there is going to have to be a constant feedback loop of information coming from the consultant, the builder, the architect, and the homeowner in order to drive the process forward. The other part of it is that we felt like it was really important to concentrate on the homeowner. Presumably the homeowners have lived in the buildings for a number of years, and they really have a great understanding of how the building is functioning. Whether they can put the passive house terminology to it or not it doesn't really matter. What we wanted to do is we wanted to derive some information from them, maybe through a survey, maybe through an interview process, to help understand, is the building too hot? What are the pain points of living in that building? Is it noisy on the outside? Is there poor indoor air quality? So that we could start to establish a list of priorities of which to address a retrofit. So from that, we also felt like it was really important to establish our team very early in the process. And this is easier said than done, right? We're talking about phasing a project maybe over years. So we need a team that's going to be dedicated to jumping in when it comes time, either triggered by budget or triggered by the convenience to the homeowner of jumping in, doing this retrofit, and doing it in a sequence that makes sense, so that we're not having to go back and redo work. We felt like it was important to really look at this as a project that was starting out as if we were completing it from beginning to end in a very short period of time, and then building out our scheduling, building out our sequencing appropriately to what the concerns of the owner of the building were.
Nice. And I guess for the sequencing, was there kind of a general idea of how it should kind of go when you're doing a retrofit, or is it really depend on the building and you shouldn't make generalities?
Some of it depends on the building. Some of it depends on that information that we get from the client at the very beginning of what the pain points of the building are. And then a conversation with the client of, yeah, we understand that this is a big pain point of the building, but it makes sense for us to do certain other things before we address that. So it is, like I said, it is this constant feedback loop. And so we're actually started to work on a flow chart of how that might look. And it's not completed yet, but there's a lot of lines going in a lot of different directions and feeding back and forth to a lot of different team members of a project like this.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how complex these retrofits are in general, whether it's multifamily or single family, right? I mean, single family can be quite as complex because, I guess the owners might be a little bit more involved, right? In those projects. And you have to really figure out what their pain points are and how, where they're sensitive or not. I'm curious about the other single family retrofit group. What was your focus, Fabrizio?
And thank you for your patience.
Yeah, probably the last one. Yeah, so we had a good chat, and yeah, I think that Mark just told us main points, but the retrofit, it's never easy. Again, the flow chart, it's a tree, the decision tree or a flow chart. I think it's the major point to start when you have a retrofit, because it's like a puzzle. I mean, is it the windows are okay? Is it the envelope is okay? But one thing that we did a consensus is that the envelope, it comes first. We always saying build tight, ventilate right. So I think that the envelope, it's the first thing that we need to focus, and then we can work on the inside, which is relatively easy, because on the outside we have always major problem with the city, and there's brick, and it's more expensive to do by the outside. Yeah, and the flow chart can gives us we can also put in the flow chart some quality control that have to be done in those in this kind of process, like kind of checklist, blower door test, photos, some openings in the wall, some explorations to ensure that we know exactly how the walls, the envelope is built, and make sure that the people that are working in this retrofit have the right training. They know exactly what means continuous insulation, continuous sealing as well, which we always struggle in on site. So just preventing this issue would be during the first step of the project would be great, and training, mock-ups, checklist that is needed to on those kind of project as well. And obviously the cost is always a barrier on the project. I think it's a question of transparency with the builder and the architect. They need to be there in the first step. The builder can just bring the cost, and the architect is going to bring the concept and the all the architectural details that can be done. So I think I also work in the same way with my customers. I always explain them what are the benefits going that way and the other way. Yeah, so I think, by the way, I do major retrofit. So I'm a general contractor, and I always like when I come early in the process, because it's easier to, yeah, just to bring the project in the right way at the beginning. Otherwise, when I come too late, the customers has already a dream. So it's very hard for us to break that dream. Yeah. So bring the team earlier in the process, good people, competent people, and and have a process that is with a flow chart. I think it's the, it's a way to getting to the success, I guess. Yeah.
So like the big takeaway there for me is don't crush the client's dreams. So,
yeah.
I'm not going to end well.
Yeah.
But I know we've gone over time, but I do want to kind of tie some of the last, I guess, 4, maybe 5 groups that just spoke all together with a question, which is the question of certification and kind of selling certification for a retrofit. How do you go about doing that? Is there anything that, I'm sure it's going to be different for multifamily and for single family, but I just want to hear some thoughts from folks about that.
I'm not entirely sure that certification is the end goal. especially in retrofit. I think data management, I think doing a model, I think building to a model is super important. But the way I kind of look at it is that certification it can become a goal in and of itself. And really the goal should be advancing the performance of that building as far as you can go, because there will be budget limitations. And oftentimes, if you make certification the goal, you're putting undue pressure on the project that may not allow you to reach certain other goals that are just as important, or at least gets the building from, -0, let's say, to 50% of the way to passive house. That being said, we have to keep in mind the methodologies and the principles behind it, because we don't want to be doing things lesser than just because of budget. We want to make sure that we're attending to the requisite airtightness. Maybe we can't get to the airtightness that we need to be on an interfit project, but we get there, we get as far as we can, also keeping in mind what that effect has on the building. Because we might be dealing with a building like, my personal house, I was a 17 ACH. To get to, a 1 was going to be a or a very large task and a very large lift that I just was not going to be able to do. But I got to 3, that's pretty good, right? So
That's a heck of a lot better.
I think to answer that question, or take that question even a little further, Jay, I'm kind of in the really debating when to say passive house out loud when I'm talking to people. I really am totally in love with all this, everything about it. And just, we bring it into all of our projects, whether it's passive house or not, because it's just, the building science is making for healthier, more durable buildings, better indoor air quality. So it's an automatic that I think all architects should be, and contractors should be bringing into their work. And it has the feel now, and has for a while, almost the way, if you said you were going to do a green building, like it was like a death knell, with certain clients. Like it was like the project, you weren't under consideration anymore. Like it was not helpful. So I think it's just, you want to make healthy environments. You want to model. You don't have to tell them necessarily, what you're modeling with, or I don't know. I'm not speaking for our group there, Sandra, but just talking out loud there.
I tell people that I did subversive green building design for over 2 decades, because I didn't tell people what they were, like all the strategies that were buried into it. They just knew that it felt good, it felt different. They're like, what is this? Half the time when I walk them through a space, and they just know it's different. And I think that's what it comes down to, is what's going to speak to your client, what's going to motivate them to invest in a better building that is going to perform better. And that certification, sometimes it's great to push certain organizations and bodies. Like I know I worked on a large hospital here, and if they didn't have the LEED Silver certification that they were targeting at the end, then they would let a lot of things slide, and there was a huge penalty if they hadn't achieved that. So sometimes that carrot is really good, or the carrot or the stick, but a lot of the times that's not meaningful. For my client over in Fogo Island, the LEED certification wasn't meaningful to them. They put that money into solar photovoltaic and solar hot water systems that really help the operations of the building. And I don't know, both would have been good if they had done both, but you can't have a cake and eat it too. So it depends on the client.
I agree. And I think, one thing I'd like to add too is, the answer to this question is contextual for the period that we're in right now. Amongst this group here, we're all passionate about passive house and the performance of our buildings. And so we are going to test and make sure that what we're building is achieving the goals and the performance that we set out to achieve. As this industry evolves and there's more practitioners, ideally costs are going to come down in the form of materials, more materials becoming available, and and certification may come down. And so the answer to that question may be different in 10 or 15 years. So we're really answering it within the context of the market conditions today.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So I know that we're kind of running short on time by now. I think it's amazing what everyone shared. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining these groups and then, showing up and sharing all these findings. And for sure, I would like to see the deliverables at the end that can be shared with a broader audience. But I have one last question, and I'm just curious about your experience working in these cohorts and in this with these summer labs, because that was the first time that was being set up and done by the collective. So I would just like to hear some feedback on that, because it sounds like everyone was really into it.
I'll start. I mean, I said this yesterday in that gathering, but I think it was a fantastic idea. I love the scale of the groups. I think it was great to be in a smaller group, get to know people, we had not met before. And having a small number of sessions, it wasn't a huge commitment, but it was targeted. And so it had a beginning and an end that was kind of one could manage putting into their life. So I thought all of that was excellent, as a way to approach it. It's a different form of learning that I've found, or sharing, learning, teaching, whatever way it was going, because I was learning a lot, during the course of it. I had the pleasure, I was in two of the groups just by however that happened, but it was great, and they were both very different. And so I had different perspectives of them, but I absolutely think that this should continue in some form similar to this. I mean, obviously be adjusted and built upon, but I found it delightful.
I would agree that the collaboration amongst people from diverse backgrounds and different parts of the country and sharing their experience was both invigorating, and it was also validating, because we go through so much of this independently in our own isolation sometimes, and to hear people experiencing similar challenges or problems and working through them together is just really nice. And to know that, in this industry, none of us are really in competition, but the idea that you can be completely relaxed about sharing everything that you're doing, knowing that no one is second guessing you, and we're all there to collaborate and help each other, has just been really phenomenal. And then again, to Buck's point, the targeted number of sessions and a short-term deliverable made it much easier for us all to participate. And I think it allowed much more engagement than we might have had otherwise.
At the end of the day, we have quite the same kind of issues, everyone. I mean, it's share it together, all the day-to-day problems and the issue that we going through. I mean, it's very precious, kind of information to share it together, and it's a teamwork. It could be hard to hike on Everest Mountain alone. You will get it with a team, anyways. So even if you're alone on the top of the mountain, you were being there because of a team. Yeah, so it's great. I don't have other things to say.
Yeah, I'd just like to say kudos to Zach and Alan for setting this up. They made it really comfortable, I think, for everyone to participate, and convenient. And there was just great collaboration. So what they pulled together was really brilliant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the process. It was great to have some mini deadlines sort of before each meeting. I'd try to, cram to get the research that I'd been working on done, and, having a deliverable at the end. This was sort of a way of focusing research that I was already trying to do, but have some folks with a lot more practical experience than me. My group was all older, architects with a lot more time in the field than me. So to be able to kind of bounce my findings and my impressions off of them and have their concerns guide my research a little bit more was really great. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just going to echo what everybody else said, that it was just so nice to collaborate with people from different backgrounds, different perspectives. We were all kind of learning from each other and, just sharing ideas. And yeah, like I said, we were looking forward to hopefully continuing and, getting together again and kind of talking through more ideas. But I think the structure that Zach and Alain put together was really helpful. Just having all of those, having those little deliverables, having those, it helped us kind of stay focused. And it was hard. Sometimes we felt, oh, we don't have enough time. It's like we want to keep going and talking about more things. That's where I think it would be nice to continue and bring more people into the group. So I thought it was really successful.
Thank you. But this was great. Thanks, everyone.
So that was our interview with the Summer Labs. Thanks again, Ilka and Jay. Maybe we can start with you, Ilka. What were your key takeaways or impressions from these conversations?
Well, it was definitely a first, talking to so many people at once, trying to keep a timeline there. So that was a little challenging because everyone just had so many really awesome things to say. And I thought each one of the labs was just so interesting. I mean, I could go into the details, but I think overall, my big takeaway was just how happy everyone was to spend extra time with each other and just talking through these topics, and that everyone really wants to keep going with it, that they talked about that it was a different format than usual. So everyone thought that this summer lab or this lab format was just so successful because it was just these smaller groups on a very kind of tight deliverable timeline, so that they really had to get something done, more or less. It wasn't just an endless conversation, but it was just these like short spurs of people that had the same interest and wanted to talk about it. And I'm really excited about, that this is going to be, I guess, there's going to be another one, right?
Yeah,
There are
exactly.
labs
Yeah,
coming.
right.
And
They're right. There's a
yeah,
seasonal. It
yeah.
feels like there's going to be a renewal every season. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And that they want to keep going too. And I totally agree with everyone that there should be some kind of a deliverable as well, so that this doesn't, these really just very rich conversations, that they just don't get lost.
Yeah. And we have 8 insight briefs. So each lab has produced a written insight brief. And so we'll package that all together and share it out. And we'll be sharing the insights of each lab at the Passive House Accelerator Live. So 4 of the labs will present this week on Wednesday at noon Eastern. And then the other 4 labs will present in a month's time. So those are a couple of ways that we're going to be sharing those out. And of course, then these labs will be continuing their work with a new set of work in the fall. But there does feel like we're definitely looking for all opportunities to share these insights as broadly as we can, because there's some really great stuff there. Jay, what did you think?
I think, yeah, just broadly speaking, I think one of the great things about it was how folks came from a lot of different perspectives, not only in terms of region or the climate where they're, operating from, but like, you had people who are builders, architects, engineers, building scientists. So you get kind of, groups who aren't normally sitting and spitballing together, kind of talking. And I think you really came up with some interesting ideas. I mean, I feel like everybody's on the same page. There wasn't like, nobody's like got into a heated argument or like completely like, no, you're wrong. Like we're all close to the same page, but it's just like that, the different perspective on the same problem can help, with building solutions. And yeah, I think, insurance just comes up a lot more when you talk with normally I'm focused on building science when I'm writing articles and interviewing folks and just talking about insurance and insurability in the face of resilience or in the face of like these climate disasters. It really puts a new sense of urgency. Just like we need to do something, otherwise, like these properties are going to be uninsurable. So if that's another way that we can kickstart, people building more resiliently, more sustainably, that's a great idea, especially if insurance companies want to get involved and start giving you some type of incentive. If you build in a WUI area or even a place that's like of not super high risk, but still risky for wildfire or for flooding.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea, or a great point. And one area that there was a little bit of divergence. So we actually had 3 labs that are focused on phased retrofits. One lab was focused on phased retrofits of multifamily and larger buildings, and then 2 labs both were focused on phased retrofits for single family buildings. And the 2 labs came down differently on whether certification should be a priority. One saying that certification brings rigor and third-party verification and just quality control, those arguments, and the other one saying, well, the point is to make the better building, and if we don't make it all the way to certification, that's okay. If and I think both important and strong points. So, but you're right, it didn't come to fisticuffs when that topic came up.
No, and it was that I feel like that's a conversation that's been going on, a kind of an undercurrent for the as long as I've been doing this for the last 6 years, which is crazy that's been that long. But that's kind of been a back and forth, and I don't think it's going to get resolved anytime soon, but it's always healthy to have that conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Anything else that either of you wanted to share?
So I think for me, what was a really interesting discussion too was the discussion about survivability, because it was kind of a different discussion because it wasn't just focused on the buildings, right? Or building physics or next steps. It was more a broader view of what does that mean? That it really is not just about the building. And I do think as important as it is to figure out of course, the buildings and how to do all of this, I think it's equally important to step back and really just kind of see the broader picture, overall and figure out what how far does it go and what is all part of this. So I thought that was really interesting.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Ilka and Jay. And I hope folks enjoyed listening to the ideas from those summer labs. I know I did. And we're going to be presenting those, of course, I mentioned at Passive House Accelerator Live this Wednesday, September 24th, at a summer lab report at noon Eastern. So you can go to the Passive House Accelerator website to register for that and join us for free. Later this week inside the collective, we will be joined by Ashley Wissey, who will be doing an Ask Me Anything session with us focused on decarbonizing multifamily housing. This is a follow-up to her presentation at Passive House Accelerator Live last week. So that is going to be really great. This Friday, if you are in or around New York City, you can check out Regenerative Metropolis 25, which is a full day event at the University Center on Fifth Avenue. It's the title of it is Passive House as Foundation to System Integration. And that is presented by New York Passive House, the Parsons Healthy Materials Lab, and the New School, Parsons New School. I should also mention on the collective, we are about to open a new cohort that is in partnership with the Healthy Materials Lab. So this Healthy Materials cohort will feature conversations and exploration of healthy materials in our practice around in Passive House and high performance building, and will be joined by folks like John Sarah Ruth and Allison Mears, the leaders of the Healthy Materials Lab, as well as others. So that's another cool thing that's happening inside the collective. And I feel like there is one more thing. Oh, and yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that if you are interested in being part of the fall labs in the collective, we encourage you to check out the collective. We'd love to have you join us and be part of the next series of labs. We designed these so that they are not heavy lift. They're a light lift over the course of the fall season. You'll meet 3 times with your lab and generate an insight brief at the end, and then have the opportunity to share that out if you want to be a spokesperson for your lab, which is a cool chance to connect with the broader Passive House community as well. So I think with that, that's all I have to share. Ilka and Jay, any final thoughts?
No, I think it was great, and it was a great experiment, and I think the fall labs, it's just going to keep getting better as we kind of refine it and figure out how to get a final product even better.
Yeah, I hope to see everyone at the FIUSCon soon in Milwaukee.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for bringing up FIUSCon again. That is definitely a really key event this fall, and we hope that everybody listening who is able to join us in Milwaukee will do so. It'll be fun. Thanks, everyone. See ya.